So for this deep dive, we're going super granular, like always, and focusing in on one skill, one really valuable skill. And today it's something that, especially if you're using English, you really kind of have to master how to disagree politely without, sounding like a jerk.
Yeah,
So we've got this awesome script called "How to Disagree Politely in English Without Sounding Rude."
right.
And what we're going to try and do is pull out the most important techniques and takeaways to make sure that you can handle these disagreements with grace, basically.
Yeah, it seems so simple on the surface, but there's so many little subtleties, I think, to really being able to disagree well in English.
For sure, for sure. And I think one of the things that's really interesting to start with is like, why does it feel so hard sometimes?
Right.
So the script points to a few things, and one of them is cultural differences. Like in some cultures, disagreeing directly is like a huge no-no.
Yeah.
And then you have English-speaking contexts, especially the US and the UK, where, being clear and direct, even when you disagree, it's actually kind of valued as long as you're doing it, politely. So what might feel direct and honest to one person could come off as like totally rude to someone else.
Absolutely. That's a really great place to start. And that actually leads directly into the second point, I think, which is how much tone matters.
Totally.
You can say the exact same words and have them be totally neutral and just firm, or you can say them and make them sound really aggressive
Yeah.
just by your tone.
And then I think the third point that the script brings up, and this is something I think a lot of English learners kind of struggle with, is that worry of offending. So they might try to be extra polite and soften their language
Yeah,
to the point where what they're actually trying to say gets kind of lost.
right. And then you're not really communicating what you want to communicate.
Exactly. Exactly.
That's such an important point. And actually, even building on that, talking about that indirectness a little bit, there's this really funny little fact about British English that the script mentions,
Oh, okay.
which is that saying something like, "I'm not sure about that,"
Mm-hmm.
can actually be like a really polite way of disagreeing.
Whoa. Okay.
But it's very, very firm. It's like, I'm not sure about that." But what they're actually saying is like, "I really disagree.
No way.
I strongly disagree."
Wow.
But it's just this level of understatement that, if you're not used to it, you would never pick up on.
So it's almost like you have to like read between the lines. You have to pick up on all these cues to even really understand what someone's trying to say.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So now that we've kind of gotten a sense of like why this is hard,
Yeah.
what are some actual phrases or techniques you can use?
So the script offers some really helpful softening phrases
Okay.
that you can use in everyday conversations. So if you want to kind of gently disagree, with someone, you could say things like, "I see what you mean, but," or "That's an interesting point. I just think," and then you kind of give your perspective. Or something like, "I might look at it differently."
Yeah, I like that.
And what these phrases are all doing is they're acknowledging the other person's perspective first before offering your own. So it's a really nice way of saying, "I hear you."
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. So it's almost like a little handshake
Yeah,
before you go in a different direction.
totally.
And the script gives us some other phrases that are more for like formal situations, like at work or somewhere where you want to be really polite and respectful.
Right.
So these are phrases like "I respectfully disagree because," which is it's still quite direct, but you're framing it with respect.
Yes.
Or something like "I understand your perspective, though my take is," which sounds a little less confrontational.
Yeah.
And then "Could I offer an alternative view?" which again sounds more collaborative.
It's more like an invitation to discuss ideas.
For sure. And then there's this awesome little pro tip that they put in the script, which is just to remember to smile,
Ah, yes.
right? Or to keep a really friendly tone.
So important.
Because that can completely change how your words are received, no matter what phrase you use.
Totally. It just lets the other person know that you're not trying to be difficult.
For sure. For sure. Okay. So the script also goes into this strategy that I think is super interesting called the yes, but technique.
Oh, yes.
So can you tell us a little bit about how that works?
Yeah, so this is a really effective technique because you're basically using agreement first to kind of soften the disagreement that comes after.
Oh,
So it's a three-step approach.
okay.
The first step is to acknowledge something the other person has said. So you're basically finding a point of agreement even if it's just a small point. You start with that. So you say, you're right that X, but, and this just shows the person that you've actually been listening to them and that you can see their point of view.
Okay, so you're kind of like finding common ground before you diverge, you know?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Cool. So what's the second step?
So the second step is the transition. And this is basically where you signal that you're about to offer a different perspective. And there are a few phrases you could use here. You could say, at the same time, I feel, or however, or on the other hand, or even just yet.
Okay.
So these are all just kind of like little bridges to your differing viewpoint.
Okay, so you've found the common ground, you've kind of transitioned, and now the third part is to actually suggest that alternative.
Exactly. So you might follow your but with something like, maybe we could consider why, or perhaps there's another approach that we haven't thought of yet.
Uh-huh.
And the script gives this great example. They say, I agree that the project needs speed, but I worry rushing might hurt quality. Could we balance both?
Oh, that's really good.
So you can see very clearly there's the agreement, the transition with the but, and then a suggestion for a solution. Right. So it's almost like you're taking a potential conflict and you're turning it into a problem-solving, problem-solving session. Collaborative. Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. And the script actually recommends that you practice this technique with a friend on, like, low-stakes topics, like, whether or not a movie was good or bad, or what kind of food you like. So I think that's a really great way to kind of get comfortable with it.
Yes, definitely. Takes the pressure off.
Absolutely. But as the script wisely points out, the words that we use are really only one aspect of how we communicate. Right. And this is where body language and tone come in, which I think a lot of times people don't really think about as much.
Absolutely.
So the script emphasizes how important it is to keep your tone calm and curious, rather than, sounding like you want to pick a fight.
Exactly.
Think about how different, like, the phrase I disagree can sound.
Totally. Yeah.
If you say it one way, it's like, okay. But another way, it's like, what?
Yeah.
And what about facial expressions?
Yeah, so the script actually mentions something interesting about this, which is that a slight frown, when it's combined with a nod, can actually show that you're thinking about what's being said. It doesn't mean that you want to argue. It just means that you're processing the information.
So it's like a thoughtful frown.
Yeah, exactly.
Not an angry frown.
Exactly. Yeah.
I like that. And they also talk about using pauses.
Yes.
Saying things like, before you disagree.
It gives you that extra little beat to think about what you want to say.
Yeah.
So you don't just sound reactive.
And it also signals to the other person that you've heard them.
Yes.
And you're actually thinking about what they said.
It's just like creating a little bit of space.
Right. So what are some body language actions that we should really try to avoid if we want to disagree politely?
So the script cautions against things like crossing your arms, rolling your eyes, or interrupting while the other person is speaking.
Oh, yeah.
Because these can really undermine any attempt at politeness.
For sure.
And they can make you seem rude or dismissive.
They just communicate like so much negativity.
Exactly, yeah.
So what about when things get a little heated?
Yes.
Even if you're trying your best to be polite, what are some ways to kind of de-escalate things if the conversation starts getting a little intense?
So this is where having some de-escalation phrases in your back pocket can be really useful.
Yeah.
And the script offers a few. One is, let's agree to disagree on this one.
Oh, yeah, classic.
Which is a really clear way to say, okay, we're not going to get anywhere with this.
Yeah.
Let's move on.
That can be such a lifesaver sometimes.
Totally.
Okay, cool. So what are some other ones?
Another really helpful phrase is, I think we both want the same outcome. We just see different paths to get there, which is really great because it's focusing on the shared goal.
Yes.
And it's not saying that you have a fundamental conflict of values or anything like that.
Right.
It's just that you're approaching it differently.
Like that.
Another one is, maybe we can revisit this after we've had some time to think about it more, or maybe we can look into some more information about this later.
Okay.
And these both kind of offer a way to pause the discussion respectfully.
And then maybe come back to it, when you've
Cool.
had a chance to cool down or do a little more research.
Yeah.
Great. Those are really helpful. And then the script also throws in a really interesting cultural note here, specifically about passionate debate.
Yeah. It points out that in the U.S. and the U.K., it's pretty normal to have a lively debate.
Okay.
And even be quite passionate about it. And this isn't necessarily a bad thing.
Interesting.
It can actually be a sign that people are, really engaged with the topic.
So you're saying it's not always a bad thing if someone's like really fired up about something.
Right. It doesn't necessarily mean they're being rude or aggressive.
Hmm.
It could just be their communication style.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Huh? That's a good point. It's definitely something to keep in mind. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what would you say are the biggest takeaways for our listeners?
So the core idea here is that being able to disagree politely is such a valuable skill, not just for communicating well in English, but really for all kinds of relationships and interaction.
Absolutely.
And it comes down to both what you say, so using those softening phrases and structured techniques like yes,
Uh-huh.
but also really importantly, how you say it.
Right.
Paying attention to your tone of voice and your body language.
Yes.
And then having those de-escalation strategies in your back pocket,
Yeah.
just in case things start to get a little bit out of control.
For sure. Absolutely. And we've got a little mission for you this week, listener. So, following the script's suggestion, we want you to find someone you feel comfortable with. Maybe a friend, a family member, a trusted colleague.
Right.
And practice disagreeing with them on something super low stakes.
Exactly.
Like what your favorite color is or what kind of music you like or whatever.
Yeah.
And try using one of those softening phrases